A boot came down hard on rotted wood. The plank cracked. Splinters flew up into the dust. He stopped. He listened. Below the floor, something moved. It was small. It was slow. And it was breathing. He dropped to his knees. He pressed his ear against the boards. A second breath came through the gap. Shallow. Wet. Human. His hand went to the knife on his belt before he even thought about it. 40 years in these mountains, and he had never heard anything like that come up from under a cabin floor. His name was Earl Hadley, 62 years old. A trapper. A widower. A man who walked up that ridge looking for a dry place to sleep before nightfall. What he pulled out of that hole was not supposed to be alive. What he carried out of those woods changed everything. Stay with me on this one. The wind had shifted that morning. Earl had felt it before he saw it. Trapper's instinct. He'd been up on Caldwell Ridge since first light. Checking lines. Resetting two snares the rain had washed loose. The kind of work that kept a man busy and quiet and didn't ask much from him in return. That suited Earl just fine. His wife had been gone 4 years. Cancer. Quick at the end, slow getting there. He'd buried her in May and bought a new pair of boots in June and walked into these mountains and barely come out since. His daughter called from Denver every other Sunday. Asked when he was coming down. He always said soon. He never came. The cabin he kept for himself sat 8 miles east of where he stood now. A solid little place. Wood stove. 2 rooms. He could hike there in the dark with his eyes closed, and on a clear night that's exactly what he intended to do. But the wind had shifted. By 2 in the afternoon, the sky had gone the color of old iron. By 4, the first hard drops were hitting the brim of his hat. He'd known weather like this his whole life, and he didn't mistake it for what it was. There was a real storm coming. The kind that puts a man down if he's caught wrong. 8 miles was too far. He turned north instead, up toward a stretch of mountain he didn't usually cross. He remembered an old logging road from years back. Half grown over now. And somewhere along it, a few cabins from the timber days. Most had collapsed. 1 or 2 might still hold a roof over a man's head for a night. He'd take whatever he could find. The light was already failing when he came up over the rise. The trees thinned. And there it stood. A cabin. Squared logs. Sagging porch. A tin roof going to rust at the edges. Earl stopped at the tree line. He had walked these mountains for 40 years. He knew every old trapper's shack and every collapsed homesteader's cabin within a 20-mile circle of where he was standing. He had never seen this one. That bothered him. He stood there a long minute. The rain was steady now. Cold. He was 62 years old, and his knees were starting to ache from the climb, and he had nowhere else to go before nightfall. He crossed the clearing. The porch boards held him. Just barely. He touched the door. It wasn't locked. Now here's the thing. A cabin out this far, this empty-looking, with no padlock on the door, that should have meant nothing was inside worth taking. Out here, a lock told you a man cared what was on the other side of his door. And no lock told you he didn't. But when Earl pushed the door open, the first thing he saw was a padlock. It was hanging on the inside frame. Heavy, modern, brass-bodied. It had been opened recently and left to dangle. Somebody had been locking this door from the inside. Earl stood very still. The room was dim. A camp stove on the floor. A folding chair. An old mattress in the corner with a sleeping bag on it. Empty water jugs stacked by the wall. A coffee can full of cigarette butts. Somebody lived here. or somebody used it. But there was no truck outside, no four-wheeler, no tracks in the mud he could read in the dim light. Whoever stayed here came in on foot, the same way he had. The rain was hammering the roof now. The storm had landed. He told himself he'd take the chair and wait it out and be gone by first light. He told himself it wasn't his business who used this cabin. He told himself a lot of things, the way a man does when something feels wrong but the alternative is worse. He set his pack down by the door. He sat on the folding chair. He pulled his rifle across his lap because 40 years of mountain habit had taught him a few things, and one of them was this. When something feels off, you sit with your hands on iron until the feeling passes. The feeling didn't pass. He sat there 10 minutes, 20, listening to the rain, listening to his own breathing. And then he heard another breath that wasn't his. It came up through the floor. Earl sat very still and listened to a stranger breathing under his feet. He didn't move for a full minute. He just listened. The breath under the floor was slow, almost too slow. The kind of breathing a man hears when an animal he's wounded is dying in the brush. Long pauses, then a small ragged pull of air, then quiet again. But it wasn't an animal. He knew that within 3 breaths. Animals don't sigh. This thing under the floor sighed. Earl put his rifle down against the chair leg. He stood up slowly. He moved with the care of a man stalking a deer at 30 yards. He crossed to the mattress. He pulled it aside. The boards underneath were the same as the rest. Old, dark, worn, but 2 of them weren't nailed down. He could see it in the light of his small flashlight. The nail heads on those 2 boards were missing, pried up too many times. The wood around the holes was splintered from being lifted again and again. Earl's heart was beating in his throat now. He hadn't felt this in 20 years. He got down on his knees. He worked his fingers under the edge of the first board. It came up easy. Below it was a square hole cut into the subfloor, about 2 feet across. And below that hole was a hollow space he could not see the bottom of. The smell that came up out of it nearly knocked him backward. It was the smell of a thing kept alive too long in one place. He shone the flashlight down. The light caught on a curve of pale skin, a shoulder, a neck, a tangle of dark hair, a face turned up toward him. A woman's face. Her eyes were open. They were huge. The flashlight beam made them shine wet and white in the dark, and for a second Earl thought she was already dead, and that he was looking at the eyes of a corpse staring up at him from a hole in the ground. Then she blinked. She blinked and she made a sound. It wasn't a word. It was the broken edge of one. A sound a person makes when they have not used their voice in a very long time, and they are trying to. Earl said the only thing he could think to say. "I'm gonna get you out." She started to cry. No sound. Just tears running down a face that was so thin he could see the shape of every bone. Earl pried up the second board. He lay flat on his stomach. He reached down into the hole. There was a chain. It ran from a thick iron ring bolted into the floor of the hollow space, down to a cuff around her ankle. The cuff was old metal. It had cut into her skin. The skin had healed and recut and healed again so many times that there was a band of dead gray flesh around her leg. He could not break the cuff. He could see that immediately. But the ring on the floor of the hole, that he could maybe pry. He went back to his pack. He pulled out his hunting knife and a small folding pry bar he kept for reasons that had nothing to do with this. He went back to the hole. He climbed in. The space was barely big enough for him. 5 feet deep. Maybe 4 feet across. A dirt floor. A bucket in the corner that he did not want to look at and did not look at. He worked the pry bar under the iron ring. He leaned on it with everything he had. 62 years old and his back screamed, and he didn't care. The ring came loose on the third pull. The bolt sheared. The girl made a sound he would never forget. It was halfway between a sob and a laugh. He gathered her up. She weighed almost nothing. Maybe 90 pounds. He could feel every rib through the thin shirt she was wearing. He lifted her up through the hole and laid her on the boards above and climbed up after her. Then he carried her to the mattress. He set her down gentle as he could. He found a sleeping bag and wrapped her in it. She was shaking so hard her teeth were knocking together. He went to his pack and got out his canteen and held it to her lips. She tried to drink, and most of the water ran down her chin. He used a corner of his shirt to wipe her face. "Slow," he said. "Slow now." Her lips moved. He bent close. "How long?" she whispered. "How long what, sweetheart? How long was I down there?" Earl didn't have an answer for that. He didn't know. "I'm gonna get you out of these mountains," he said instead. "I'm gonna get you to a hospital. I'm gonna get you home." She closed her eyes. For a long minute he thought she had passed out. Maybe died. He put 2 fingers to her neck the way he'd done with his wife at the end. Her pulse was there. Faint, but there. He sat back on his heels. The rain was easing outside. The worst of the storm had passed. The cabin was warm enough. She was breathing. She was wrapped. She was out of the hole. For one long moment Earl Hadley let himself believe the worst part was over. He let himself sit there on the floor next to a girl he didn't know and feel something that wasn't quite relief, but was the closest thing to it he'd felt in a year. He even smiled a little. He shouldn't have. A board creaked on the porch. Earl froze. It wasn't the wind. The wind didn't put weight on a board. The wind didn't pause halfway across. Someone was standing on the porch. The girl's eyes flew open. Her whole body went rigid under the sleeping bag. She made a sound in her throat. She tried to crawl backward. There was nowhere to go. She looked at Earl. She mouthed 2 words. "He's back." Earl moved fast for a man his age. He was on his feet and had his rifle in his hands before the next porch board creaked. He stepped between the girl and the door. He thumbed the safety off. The doorknob turned. The door pushed inward an inch and stopped. A voice on the other side. "Come." Friendly almost. "Hey, friend. I see your boots by the door." Earl said nothing. "You wait out the storm in here." Earl said nothing. "I'm gonna come in now. I just don't want any trouble." Earl raised the rifle. He aimed it at the doorframe. Chest height for an average man. He'd done this with elk and bear, and once with a man who was trying to steal his truck 20 years ago. His hands were steady. The door pushed open. The man who walked in was somewhere in his 40s. Tall. Lean. A canvas coat soaked at the shoulders. He had a face that you would forget the second you stopped looking at it. Brown hair. Beard. Nothing remarkable. The kind of face that worked on a man who didn't want to be remembered. He saw Earl. He saw the rifle. He saw the girl on the mattress with the sleeping bag pulled around her. His friendly face did not change at all. "Now hold on," he said. "Step back outside," Earl said. "Slow. This is a misunderstanding. Step back." The man's right hand drifted toward his hip. "Don't," Earl said. The man's hand stopped. "You've got a girl in here," the man said. "I don't know how she got here, but you bolted that ring to that floor." You hold the only key on this mountain. Don't insult me." The man smiled then. It was a small, cold smile. "You're an old man," he said. "You shouldn't have come up this ridge." That was when Earl shot him. Not a kill shot. He didn't aim for one. He'd been a hunter long enough to put a bullet exactly where he wanted it. He put it through the man's right thigh. The man went down hard. He screamed. The sound was huge in the small cabin. He clutched at his leg. Blood pumped out between his fingers. Earl stepped forward. He kicked the man's hand away from his hip. He pulled a pistol out of the man's coat pocket and threw it across the room. He kept the rifle on him. "You stay there," Earl said. The man was breathing hard. His face had gone white. "You don't know what you've done," he said. "I think I do. I'm not the only one." Earl went still. "What did you say?" The man laughed. There was blood in his teeth from biting his lip when he fell. "There's 3 of us. We share this cabin. We share what's in it." Earl looked at the girl. She had gone gray. She was nodding very slightly. It was true. Earl looked back at the man on the floor. "When are the others coming?" "Tonight." "How tonight?" "Any time. Any time now." Earl did not let the rifle drop. But inside his chest, something went cold and very still. He had walked into something he had not understood. He had thought he was rescuing one girl from one bad man and a hole in the ground. He had thought the ugly part was over. He had thought wrong. This was not one man. This was a system. A place that men used together. A cabin built for what it was built for, and used for what it was used for, and there were others who would walk up that ridge tonight expecting what they always found. The girl was looking at him. There was no hope on her face anymore. There was just the still, flat look of someone watching a door she had given up on. Earl swallowed. He spoke to her without looking away from the man on the floor. "How many?" "2 more," she whispered. "Maybe 3. "How long until they come?" "He always comes first." She meant the man bleeding on the floor. "The others come after dark." Earl looked toward the window. It was full dark already. He had not noticed. He had a wounded man, an injured girl who could barely walk, a rifle, 12 rounds in his pocket, and a storm-soaked mountain between them and any road. And somewhere on that mountain, 2 or 3 men were already walking toward this cabin in the dark. Quick aside here. If you're still with me on this story, hit that subscribe button. I'll tell you what happened next, but I want to know there are people out there who want to hear how it ends. Now back to the cabin. Earl bent down. He pulled the laces out of the wounded man's boots. He tied his hands behind his back tight enough to hurt. He shoved a balled-up rag from the floor into his mouth. Then he turned to the girl. "Can you walk?" She tried to sit up. She got halfway. She fell back. "No," she said. Earl nodded. Once. He had already made the decision. He wasn't going to run. You don't run, in the dark, in a storm, on a mountain, carrying a girl who weighs nothing and bleeds when she's touched. You don't outrun 3 men who know this ground better than you do. You make them come to you. You make them walk into a room they think is safe. And you wait. Earl moved fast. He dragged the wounded man into the corner away from the door. He propped him up against the wall where he couldn't be seen from the porch, but could be seen from inside. He left the gag in. The man's leg was still bleeding, and his eyes had gone glassy with pain, but he was conscious. Earl wanted him conscious. He pulled the mattress with the girl on it back behind the camp stove, out of the line of sight from the door. He covered her with the sleeping bag. He laid an old tarp over her so that someone walking in would see only the lump of an old mattress thrown in the corner. "Don't make a sound," he said. "No matter what you hear. You don't move." She nodded. He went around the cabin. He checked every window. There were two. Both were nailed shut from the inside with thick boards. The men who used this place hadn't wanted anything getting out. Now the same boards meant nothing was getting in either, except through the door. One way in. Earl smiled without any humor. He'd hunted this way for 40 years. You build a chute. You make the animal walk where you want it to walk. He turned the camp stove off. He blew out the lantern. He shut the flashlight off. The cabin went black. He sat down on the folding chair. He set the rifle across his knees. He faced the door. Then he waited. Time stretched out the way it does when a man is sitting in the dark and listening for what is going to come and kill him. He thought about his wife. He thought about his daughter. He thought about the call he should have answered last Sunday and hadn't. He thought about the girl on the mattress behind him. 90 pounds. A face like a skull. A chain healed into her ankle. His hand stopped shaking. He heard the boots before he saw the man. 2 pairs. They came up the path slow. They were talking to each other. Low voices. Easy. A laugh once. They had no idea anything was wrong. The boots crossed the porch. The doorknob turned. The door swung open. The first man stepped in. He was bigger than the one on the floor. Heavier. He had a flashlight in one hand and a six-pack in the other. "Carl," he called out. "We're here." The wounded man in the corner, Carl, made a small, gagged sound. The big man swept his flashlight across the room. The beam caught Earl in the chair. Earl shot him. This time he didn't aim for the leg. The big man dropped where he stood. The six-pack hit the floor and rolled. Behind him on the porch, the second man was already running. Earl heard the boots tearing back across the boards. Earl was up and moving before the body on the floor had stopped twitching. He went out the door fast and low. The second man was 20 feet away, sprinting for the trees. Earl could see the dark shape against the slightly less dark woods. He raised the rifle. He breathed out. He squeezed. The man went down in the wet grass. Earl stood on the porch in the rain. The rifle was still raised. He listened. He listened a long time. 2 more, the girl had said. Maybe 3. He waited 5 minutes. 10. 15. Nothing else moved on that mountain except the wind and the rain. Earl lowered the rifle. He went down off the porch slow. His knees were screaming. His back was on fire. He walked over to the second man. The man was face down in the wet grass. He was not moving, but Earl checked anyway. He rolled him over with his boot. Then he checked his pulse. There was none. Earl looked at his face. He didn't know him. Of course he didn't know him. None of these men were anyone he would have known. They had careful faces. Forgettable faces. The kind of faces you build over years of doing what they did and not getting caught. Earl walked back to the porch. He stopped at the body of the big man. He checked. Same result. That left Carl. Earl walked into the cabin. He turned the lantern back on. The yellow light came up slow over the room. Carl was still in the corner. His leg was bleeding less. The blood under him had spread into a pool the size of a dinner plate. He was conscious. His eyes followed Earl across the room. Earl pulled the rag out of his mouth. How many more? None. Don't lie to me. 2. There were 2. The ones outside. You said 3. I lied. To scare you. To make you run. His voice was thin and bubbling. I thought you'd run. Earl looked at him a long moment. Are there other girls? Carl didn't answer. Are there other girls? I don't know what you mean. Earl raised the rifle. He pointed it at Carl's head. Are there other girls? In other cabins? Anywhere on this mountain? Carl looked up at him. There was something in his face, then that Earl had only seen on dying animals. The understanding that the end had arrived. No, Carl whispered. Just her. Just this one. Earl looked at him a long time. He believed him. He didn't know why. But he did. He lowered the rifle. He went to his pack. He pulled out the small first aid kit he kept for cuts on the line. He came back to Carl. He tied a tourniquet around Carl's leg above the wound. He pulled it tight. You'll live, he said. Why? Carl whispered. Earl did not answer. He went to the mattress in the corner. He pulled the tarp away. The girl was looking up at him with eyes that had a little life in them now. Just a little. It's over, he said. She started to cry. Earl carried her down the mountain that night. The rain had stopped. The clouds had broken open in patches, and the moon came through, cold and white between them. He walked with her in his arms the way a man carries a child. 8 miles to a logging road. Then 4 more to where his truck was parked. She did not weigh enough to slow him much. She slept against his shoulder for most of it. Once she woke and asked his name. He told her. She said hers. Sarah. Sarah Doyle. He didn't recognize the name then. He would later. He laid her in the cab of his truck and drove the mountain road too fast for the conditions. He drove with one hand on the wheel and the other on her wrist, feeling her pulse, telling himself she was still there. He drove straight to the county hospital. He carried her through the emergency room doors at 3 in the morning. He told the nurse the truth. He told her where he had been. He told her about the cabin. He told her about Carl tied up in it and about the 2 men in the woods. The sheriff came inside of 40 minutes. By dawn, 4 cruisers and an ambulance and a mountain rescue team were going up Caldwell Ridge. They found everything Earl had told them they would find. The story came out in pieces over the next week. Sarah Doyle had been 21 years old when she vanished from a parking lot outside a community college. There had been flyers. There had been a search. There had been a vigil that her mother held every year on the date she went missing. That had been 6 years ago. 6 years. Earl sat in his truck outside the hospital the morning he learned that, and he put his head down on the steering wheel, and for the first time since his wife had died he cried until he couldn't breathe. 6 years that girl had been in that hole. The men who had put her there had been a small group. 3 of them. Old friends, the police said. They had built the cabin on land nobody owned and nobody patrolled. They had kept Sarah there for 6 years and had taken turns going up the mountain and coming back down. They had jobs. They had houses. One of them had a wife and children. Carl lived. He went to a hospital under guard. Then to a jail. Then to a courtroom. He did not say much in the end. He did not need to. The cabin spoke for him. The hole in the floor spoke for him. He got life without parole. The other 2 were dead, of course. There was an inquest. The sheriff's office ruled the shootings justified. There was no question about it. There was only a small old trapper sitting in a wood-paneled room, answering questions in short sentences. Yes, he had walked up the ridge to wait out a storm. Yes, he had heard breathing under the floor. Yes, he had pulled her out. Yes, he had shot 2 men and wounded a third. He was thanked. He was sent home. He drove back up to his own cabin. The 8-mile one. He sat on his porch in the cold November light and looked out at the mountains he had walked his whole life. He did not feel like a hero. He felt like a man who had been very tired and had become more tired. His daughter drove up from Denver 3 days after the story broke. She walked into his cabin, and she did not say anything for a long time. She just held him. Then she made coffee for both of them, and they sat at the table, and she stayed for 2 weeks. Sarah's mother came too. She came alone. She came up the dirt road in a small car that was not built for it, and she got out and stood looking at Earl on the porch, and she could not speak. Earl came down off the porch and she put her arms around him, and they stood there in his front yard for a long time, neither of them saying anything, because there was nothing to say. When she left, she gave him a photograph of Sarah from before. A senior portrait. A girl with a real smile and clear eyes and a future. Earl put it on the mantel next to his wife's picture. Sarah recovered. Slow. Not all the way. She would not walk right again because of what the cuff had done to her ankle. She had bad nights. She would have them for a long time. But she lived. She moved back home with her mother. She started seeing a doctor twice a week. She wrote to Earl every month. He wrote back. He never went up Caldwell Ridge again. Not because he was afraid of it. Because he didn't need to. He went back to his lines. He went back to the work that had kept him quiet for 40 years. He answered his daughter's calls now. Every Sunday. He even drove to Denver for Christmas. A year after that night, Sarah came to visit him. She walked up his porch with a cane, and she sat in the chair next to his, and they watched the sun set over the mountains. She didn't say much. He didn't either. After a while, she put her hand on his. "Thank you," she said. He looked out at the ridges and the evening light fading across them, and he thought about a board cracking under his boot, and a small, slow breath coming up out of the dark, and a hand reaching down and finding another hand reaching up. "No," Earl said. "Thank you." The mountains went quiet around them. The light went out of the sky one piece at a time.